Welcome on into the Hammer Betting Network. I'm your host, Eric Pollard from the Gold Sheet with professional sports bettors, Hitman and Suma, as well as Cleve TA from TAanalytics.com. The NFL draft is just 2 days away. So naturally, we are talking draft, all things draft, best bets, actual information, so on and so forth. Before we get into it, a couple of things. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the show to help other people see it. And comments will be read in real time. So if you have any questions for the guys, let us know in the comments and we'll be able to answer those questions. It is for subscribers only, so make sure you subscribe so you can ask those questions. And we got to shout out our sponsor, Pinnacle Sportsbook, the world's sharpest sportsbook, offering competitive odds for 25 years. Channel's all about line shopping, and with everyday competitive odds, Pinnacle should be one of your available outs. If you want to support the show, when creating an account with Pinnacle, use code HAMMER when signing up. Your trusted sportsbook for 25 years. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Play responsibly, of course, and it's not available in the U.S. All right, gentlemen, let's go right into it. The NFL draft. Seeing some steam at the number 2 overall pick. The Washington Commanders have that selection, and of course, they're going quarterback. But right now, Jaden Daniels is getting some of that smoke, moving down to minus 400 with Drake May, the potential QB2, brought into the draft season now at plus 330. Suma, talk to me on your thoughts on the line movement there. Are the Commanders out on May? Are they a lock to draft Daniels? Or what do you think of this movement? Or is J.J. McCarthy still at play here at number 2 overall?
I think if they were out, the line would be like minus 5,000 or so right now. Zach Wilson 1 week out in 2021 was minus 5,000. So if it would be a done deal, the market move would steam much higher. But yesterday, I think we were down to like minus 115. Then guys betted. I know of a group that betted at minus 200-ish, but they stopped at minus 300. So if they knew something, if there was anything out there like real information, we would be looking at a much steeper price right now. So I'm still thinking that there is a lot of groupthink, like Schrager, Shefty, Daniel Jeremiah, all saying leak sources are saying that it's Daniels at 2, but nobody really knows anything for sure yet. And it was pretty much just guys betting back the Daniels price yesterday after there were some comments by Shefty that the visit was not really a huge deal for the agent. Everything is fine. They're good now. And I mean, right now, to me, there's not really any value on Jayden Daniels at minus 300 or more, because even the most plugged-in guys are saying that nobody knows for sure. It's all basically everything is operating based on what other teams in the league are thinking.
Understood. Hitman, do you agree with Suma that this is kind of just some noise and we can clearly see some buyback with a couple of days to the draft? Or do you have a strong opinion on who's being selected, or another thing where realistically nobody knows?
No, everything that Suma said is spot on. I'm just going to sit in the boat that I'm just going to keep waiting for more information. I'm going to keep, and if I have to lay minus 500, minus 600 at maybe a slow moving place when the line gets bet to infinity, as Suma said, minus 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, then I do that. I understand why the line is what it is. I think that it's appropriately priced based off the fact that you have every single respected insider that is saying that they're hearing that it's probably going to be Daniels, but nobody knows for sure. I think that the most telling report about it was Jeremiah, who was kind of like the last guy that was hanging on to the Drake May pick at number 2, saying that he thought it would be Drake May. And he was saying just recently like that, everybody that he talks to is saying Daniels also. So I think that when Jeremiah's final mock comes out, if it is Daniels, probably ends up steaming maybe even more. But I just think at this point it's appropriately priced, and I'm probably not going to have much action on it other than me just trying to maybe grab some slower moving prices once we figure out who to pick pretty confident. Just like last year at the second pick when CJ Stroud, he got bet to infinity an hour, 2 hours before the draft. Probably going to happen again with this one. So I'm just going to still remain in wait and see mode.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because Suma mentioned in the group chat before that Stroud was, prior to getting bet to infinity, was plus 500 on draft day. So if you can find a really slow moving book and maybe that line shifts to May, maybe there'll be some value. But TA, talk to me. Are you again in the same boat as Hitman and Suma, where at this point you just got to wait and see if these numbers just get bet to infinity and that's your telltale sign?
Yeah, I think it's better to catch it on the way up, even if it's not, the best number at that time, with more certainty than it is just kind of taking a stab at this number now. So, if it steams up to 500, 600, it's better to take it there, even if it's gonna, even if you missed out on the best number, prior to that, than it is to be guessing without information. I'll say, I had Stroud last year. It was one of the few things I got right last year. Was I was pretty convicted that Stroud would go to Houston. It made too much sense. And, but we, that took until, that wasn't until 24 hours. I think the night before we started to hear more and more of that. So, this is definitely not anything definitive today when it comes to these prices. I'll say I did see McShay also yesterday, Todd McShay, who's doesn't have a platform like ESPN. He's on the Russillo pod, and I think he was on Part of My Take. He came out and said, and he said this last week, that he hasn't talked to a single scout or anyone in a front office who has May ahead of Daniels, which is really interesting. Like, I don't think he's not making that up. And all these other executives, aren't, they have no reason to make that up, especially the ones that aren't even drafting that high. So I found that really interesting that, all along we thought that May was the clear number 2 all season, and even right after the draft, or right after the season ended. But clearly it's been Daniels kind of all along from a kind of a scout's view or executive view. So, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would lean obviously Daniels, but I'm not betting it just yet.
Yeah, no need. And as a Washington, man, of course.
One thing I'll add is I don't like early in the process betting on certain markets that I think there's a high chance that I might flip-flop on it. Like, for example, a few days ago, Drake May was getting steamed from like plus 250 to got down to like pick 'em at some spots. Now Daniel's being steamed. And then one more report could come out and May gets steamed again, or maybe McCarthy gets steamed. When you're doing that, like early in the process, a lot of times you just run out of places to keep betting the opposite side of on a market that has such low liquidity. And like there's some sharper sports books like Pinnacle, I'm sure they don't mind if you're betting constantly the opposite side of something. Like if you bet Drake May and then Daniels, they don't care. But for whatever reason, and it's a pretty logical reason, in my opinion, a lot of books don't like when you're constantly, if you bet both sides of a game, they say. So if you're just constantly going to be flip-flopping on this, and plus like a lot of shops that you're trying to get your most liquidity down on the draft in is sometimes like a paperhead shop that you get one crack at it, and the credit's low, you get one crack. Like you just can't keep flip-flopping on stuff. So a lot of times like on something like this, I'm just waiting for like, all right, what's going to be the point of the process that I am just the most confident, and I'm probably not going to flip-flop on it. So for this particular market, I just like to wait as long as possible and not be in a position where I have 3 or 4 or 5 different points where I'm changing my mind and chasing a number.
Yeah, and something Hitman mentioned last week for viewers this week is, like he probably said earlier, he doesn't mind paying juice on a prop if you're getting information, especially something like this where it is a solely information-driven betting process. If you are able to find a slow-moving shop and the odds are clearly changed to other books, that's probably a very telltale sign. You can still probably pick up some money in that situation. Let's start with just a very general question here on the next topic, and I'll shoot over to you right now, T.I. Is Michael Penix Jr., from everything you've seen, graded, all things considered, a first-round quarterback?
I'm not a scout, but I personally don't see him as a first-round quarterback. He's an older prospect. He's 23 years old. He started at Indiana. If you watched him at Indiana, he was just a guy. He wasn't anything special. Has a bunch of injuries in his career. he did run a good 40, which seems to be helping his stock here recently. But, he's not a runner per se. And like, just for all the years I've watched quarterbacks like this, like I just see him, he takes a really deep drop when he goes back. He played in an offense with, elite wide receivers up and down the field. He got probably the best offensive line in football. He's got multiple, first or second round picks at offensive line. So he had everything perfect around him. And yeah, when he's got time and it's like a 7-on-7 drill, he can throw a very pretty ball. But like, I just think I just don't see him translating to, get down under center, standard pro style offense. And like, I just don't, it just something about it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe the NFL teams are just getting wowed by, just how pretty the ball looks, but, and that's happened before. But I see him more as, an early second round pick from that perspective. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to go in the first round, because teams like the Raiders or the Broncos or teams that are desperate, might take a shot at him. But, just from a pure, kind of fan with a, long-standing view on watching these guys, it doesn't seem like, I don't think he's going to be successful in the NFL personally.
Yeah, it does have that beautiful looking deep ball, but we've seen a lot of beautiful looking deep balls not pan out in other very important facets of being an NFL quarterback. Hey man, do you agree with TA's assessment? Obviously not a scout, but do you have any thoughts on if Penix is worthy of a first round pick?
I don't got many thoughts on if he's worthy of it. It's just I'm more handicapping whether I think he will or won't go into the first round. So I know there's been a lot of steam on him right now. It seems like he's separating himself from Bo Nix, at least if there's going to be a fifth quarterback, it will likely be him. I would be very surprised if it was someone like Denver or Vegas taking him at the what picks they have 12-13 or 13-14. One of the two.
If it was 12-13.
Yeah, if it was one of those, I would be very surprised. I think that if it did happen, it would probably happen where they end up trading in to the late first round, or they take him in the second round. So I think that it does bring up some opportunity in the first position taken markets for these teams, because I know they say, like, if you found your franchise quarterback, you can't reach for him. Like, you just take him. If you think he's your franchise guy, you just take him at 12 or 13. But I personally am in the camp that he isn't going to go in those spots. And if he does go, it's in the later first round. So my attention is more towards betting some of those markets on those teams on the first position taken. I did take Denver first position taken corner. I got 7-1 on it. I haven't looked at it recently, but I think it's decent, probably down to 5-1 or something like that. But yeah, that's where I'm at. Michael Penix, whatever, however the hell you say his last name.
Don't fool us, Hitman. We know you're coming off the golf course to watch the YouTube clips and scouting all these players.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but like you just also mentioned though, Hitman, if somebody believes for whatever reason that Penix is a first round pick and their franchise quarterback, guess there is no such thing as a reach there, because if he pans out, obviously everything will look good, but that won't be determined for at least a couple of years down the line. But Suma, do you have any thoughts that Penix could be said franchise quarterback and is worthy of a first round pick? Or are you like Hitman, where it's more so just like, if it doesn't have value for you in terms of betting and making money, it's not something you're really thinking about?
Yes, absolutely. The latter. I took under 4.5 quarterbacks right before we jumped on the show. I'm starting to believe more and more that Penix is at the current prices less likely to go in the first round. Like Hitman said, I can rather see him getting picked late first after a team trades up. I don't really see how the Raiders take him at 13. I've Bo Nix pretty much crossed off the first round, so I think there's some value on under 4.5 quarterbacks. Penix over right now is in the +180, +190 range, depending on what we are looking at. So, and Eric made a good point, I think twice on this show already, that the fifth-year quarterback option is not as valuable anymore. And we might rather see teams trading up for an offensive lineman, for an offensive tackle into the first round, for example. Penix might go in the first round late, but I think at the current prices, I like fading Penix as the 5th quarterback.
And every single year we get like these quarterbacks that everyone thinks is going to go high, and then there's always one or two that drop in the second round. It happens every single year. So, I mean, I think we already, a lot of us assume that Nix is dropping. I think his position is 32.5, juiced to the over. So it's kind of already assumed. So it really would be, as a quote unquote surprise, would be Penix at this point.
Understood. Makes a ton of sense. But let's talk a little bit more of some picks that are potentially still actionable. Some of our viewers can maybe get something down right now. Before we start talking about some of those bets that you guys have already made, gotta remind everybody that on Thursday, Rob Pizzola will be going live for the entire first round with the Forward Progress crew right here on the Forward Progress channel. Live watch along of the NFL draft. We'll obviously be giving analysis. Obviously, the guys I'm sure will try to be getting into live on some bets as well. So the first round live watch along, that's coming up on Thursday when the first round of the 2024 NFL draft kicks off. But gentlemen, like I said, let's talk some bets that we've made. So this is a split panel that I've heard right here. Dallas Turner, very intriguing prospect, 2023 SEC Defensive Player of the Year, younger player. Right now, his number for draft position is 9.5. Over is juiced to -159. The under is sitting at 119. Hitman, start. What is your position on Dallas Turner? Think he's getting over this draft position or under this draft position?
So I am on Dallas Turner over. And I am also on some first defensive player taken markets with Latu and Verse. Those prices are pretty much gone now. But I'm on Turner over 8.5 and over 9.5. The funny thing is, it's actually my biggest position. And you would say like, oh, well, that's got to be your favorite draft prop. Then like you must love this. No, it's my biggest position because some of the stuff that I really love, like Latu under 21.5 when it opened, Byron Murphy under 18.5, stuff like that. That is like you breathe on the prop and it's gone within $1,000. The entire market's destroyed on something like that. And there's no buyback and it just keeps going lower and lower. So the Turner one is getting buyback on it. So I'm just able to get more liquidity on it. But I think it's a, yeah, exactly. I got guys like Suma and Cleve going opposite, so we're going to get a lot of liquidity on that because of each other. But the reason I like it is so Jeremiah, who everyone can probably agree is the number one guy to listen for draft tidbits and intel and everything. He said that teams are all over the map on the order of the 3 edge rushers between Turner, Latu, and Verse. Jeremiah's rankings has them all within a 4-spot range. Schefter and DJ have both said now that Murphy is in consideration for pick 8 and 9, and also for first defensive player taken. Peter Schrager has come out saying that Murphy is flying up boards and that he says it will be between Latu and Turner as the top edge rusher. And this is just noteworthy because when we started the process, Turner was like way ahead of these guys. And like he was chalk, like -160 at one point to be first defensive player taken. And comparatively, Verse was 6-1 and Latu was +550 or something. Byron Murphy was +2,000. I just think that the gap with these 4 players is not priced like that, it's a lot closer. And it's starting to get priced in a little bit, but and also with draft, I'm hearing, and again, draft intel isn't what it used to be, what it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, but it's still noteworthy. Talk to some other people, some other sharp guys about what they're hearing. I've been hearing that Atlanta desperately wants to trade down, but if they are forced to stick, that Latu is the number 1 edge on their board. Again, that could easily be wrong. And if I thought that info was the Bible, I would bet Turner over to infinity, especially considering that I heard that Verse is the number 1 edge on Chicago's board, and they're also a big trade down candidate. And Murphy is obviously now a possibility, according to all reports from like DJ Schefter, to go 8 or 9 as well. So I just think you have a lot of outs here. I think you have the outs that Turner might not be the number 1 edge on Chicago or Atlanta's board. You have the fact that both teams, I think, want to trade down, especially Atlanta could be a very strong trade candidate for a team that wants to come up for Odunze. And you have the other third factor that Murphy, his stock is skyrocketing, and the teams could not go edge, and they might go interior defensive lineman. So long way for me to say that I like Turner over, and I will give the floor to Suma and TA to tell me why another forward progress pick of mine is incorrect.
Well, TA, before you get into it, and Suma as well, I wanted to also ask you, TA, because obviously a lot of this process is information driven. You have the guys that we've discussed on previous shows, and Hitman just named some names, the guys who are really in tune in terms of the NFL media, that have connections with scouts and other people who are getting good information. But I know you do a lot of your own personal deep dives, TA, in terms of GM history, relative athletic scores, and so on and so forth. So, Tia, how much of your bet on the under is predicated on information? How much is it predicated on your own deep dive into Turner as a prospect and what teams drafting in that vicinity are due historically?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get the information that Hitman does, although some people pass stuff along, and I do have very specific, I guess, call it teams angles that I trust the most. So I don't have, the info that Hitman has on this. So this is purely a combination of some of the things that you just mentioned. Just what is the GM typically kind of profiled when he looks at first round picks? I mean, again, some of this could be coincidence, and the sample size is so small that it's not perfect. But you got a guy like Terry Fontenot, who's the GM of the Falcons. In his 3 drafts, he's taken all guys that are 21 years old or younger, and Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London. They were all highly athletic players, which Turner fits to a T, 21 years old, and ran the fastest 40 amongst all the edge rushers at the combine.
Is he gone?
One box to me. At the same time, I mean, for me, this is a matter of Atlanta having a needed edge rusher. Like obviously they got Kirk Cousins. They've got all those weapons on offense. They signed Darnell Mooney. So you're really just looking at defense here for the most part. I mean, maybe if the Odunze drops, you can see that. But in general, you're talking they're going to take a defensive player if they stick at 8. Really, the 3 biggest needs would be corner, edge rusher, and defensive tackle, but mainly corner and edge. So then I'm just narrowing down the profile of what they would typically look for. Historically, if you look at the draft, if you look at all of the edge rushers that have won Rookie of the Year, there's one commonality: they get drafted very high. They're all like top 10, top 15 picks in the draft. Like, it's never a second round edge rusher who wins Rookie of the Year or who has like a great year. I mean, there's guys who've had good years, like Byron Young last year had a good year, and he was like a 3rd round pick. But generally speaking, it's like the higher end edge rushers. If you look at where do teams typically pick, what kind of players do they pick in the first round? There's been one edge rusher over the age of 23 who's been drafted in the top 14 in like the last, I think, 7 or 8 drafts. Like, they always skew young generally at that position. And then I look at Atlanta, like, again, you need an edge rusher. And Raheem Morris, again, this isn't me. This is like the PFF guys who were talking. I think Eagers talked about this. I don't know scheme very, that deep, but Raheem Morris has his edge rushers drop back in coverage a lot, like one of the most in the NFL amongst defensive coordinators. And Turner had dropped back in coverage like 100 times last year. This is what he does. The other 2 guys don't. That's not what they were asked to do. So it would be a transition there. You got both guys in Verse and Latu are 23 years old. Verse was a 0 prospect coming out of high school. He started at Albany and transferred to Florida State. Total late bloomer. Does not profile like a top 10 pick. You've got Latu, who, by all means, looked really good last year and is very technical. Again, he's older prospect. It was like 5 years in college. He started at Washington, had to get he was medically retired because of a serious neck injury. UCLA cleared him, and he played the last 2 years. But there are some teams that have him off the board. Now, I have no idea if Atlanta does, but there's a chance that we don't know that. There's a chance he could be off their board. So that's information that we don't know. So I put that all together. It's like this profile of player, a 21-year-old edge rusher who's a freak athlete at Alabama, who day one, I mean, he had 8 sacks in his freshman year. He was a 5-star recruit. All these things point to being a top 10 pick. We saw Will Anderson last year. People don't remember. Tyreek Wilson got a lot of buzz as the top edge rusher prior to the draft. He was going number 2 in a lot of mocks. And he was a 23-year-old, and Will Anderson, who was younger, was similar profile to Turner. They ended up going in the top 3 when Houston grabbed him. So, and I think last year's success with Will Anderson at Alabama, because those guys get a lot of negative pushback because a lot of people think that their ceiling's already reached at Alabama with Saban. The fact that he produced and was so good, and essentially was the best defensive rookie last year. I think that bodes well for Turner this year. So all that being said, it doesn't have to be 8 with Atlanta. My bet was under 9.5 at plus money, essentially saying it's about 45% chance that he's going to go 8 or 9. I mean, Chicago could take him. He's an edge rusher. They need one opposite Montez Sweat. As Hitman mentioned, Atlanta could trade down. I mean, Chicago could trade down. There are plenty of teams that want to trade up for this type of profile at edge rusher at a premium position. So, again, not perfect, but I think if it was just 8, I wouldn't take it here. But the fact that you get 8 and 9, you get multiple bites at the apple, I think is just worth it based on who his competition is at that position and the profile of player.
Understood. It's something that you did mention, Cleve. Eric Gear did mention on the show the drop back rate for Dallas Turner, being a big factor to maybe why Raheem Morrison even makes more sense for him to go to Atlanta outside of some of the things you mentioned with their general manager and the way that they select, is because he does fit what Raheem Morris does. But Suma, talk to me. You're with TA on this pick. What led you to making this wager? And is there a combination of everything Hitman said with some sources as well as TA's analysis, or do you have any other things that brought you to thinking, yeah, Dallas Turner under makes a lot of sense?
Not much to add here. I'm split on under 9.5 and first D-line. Like TS said, I like landing spots with Atlanta and Chicago because both teams desperately need an edge rusher. Chicago doesn't really have anything after Montez Sweat, and it will be tough to get a starting caliber edge like in round 3 or 4. And I think on the current free agent market, Yannick Ngakoue might be the only edge worthwhile, and I don't think they made great experience with him last year. So I like 8 and 9, and what's important to me is also that he's just 2 years younger than Latu and Verse. Latu also with the neck history, maybe some teams have crossed him off. I don't believe that because he got cleared, but there's still some possibility of that. And Dallas Turner is the number 1 edge on the consensus board, 2 years younger. So I like that at the time of the pick.
I think it's important, just to add to the conversation, that draft betting, you need to leave your ego at the door. And what that means is I could be told something like tomorrow or read something or whatever that makes me completely dump my position on Turner. I could be, maybe I get told something where I want to make my biggest bet of the draft. I need to get off all my Turner over and make my biggest bet of the draft on Turner under. It's just important to be very flexible with this stuff, with the draft. And I also think that TA on Twitter did a really good job talking about how like sources on the draft just isn't what it was years ago. Like, I feel like years ago, every time I got told something regarding the draft, it won at like a ridiculous clip. And last year was the first year where I was being told stuff and it was just super inconsistent. And the best example that I could give is I have one guy that wanted infinity on Jalen Carter to go to Seattle. He wanted as much as I could get him. And I ran it through other groups that were saying that they heard the same thing. Like, Carter was getting bombed to go to Seattle and under on his draft position. And it ended up being completely wrong. And Devin Weatherspoon ended up being the pick. So I'm not as confident in a lot of this stuff as I used to be. It's more of, it's a factor. It's a very strong factor, but it's just not the Bible anymore to be told this kind of stuff. I just feel like there was a major shift this past year.
Yeah, so I'll step in here because it was my tweet, and I actually tweeted originally last year before the draft. If you look at the date, the same thing, and it wasn't coincidence. If you got to remember, so last year at this time we had just come off all those suspensions with gambling with the Lions players and Isaiah Rodgers, et cetera. It was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior, and I had been told at that point, like, there are no leaks anymore. At least last year, there were no leaks. Like, whatever you're hearing about so-and-so team is going to do this is either just a flat out lie or just coming from a very, very low level or poor source within a team, if there is someone saying that. So I was told that last year before the draft, and we saw it was, if you look at mock drafts, it was the single worst mock draft kind of consensus that I've ever seen. Nobody got anything right. I mean, the fact that literally Lance Zierlein, who is as connected to Houston as you can get, was saying no way that they were going to take CJ Stroud, all the way up until like the day of the draft. He finally changed his tune. Now, the day of the draft, I think you'll get enough leaks from the agents that, because, teams are going to tell players and their agents, their interests. I think that is more real. But like in these coming days, like before that, I don't believe anything that's going on. I think combination of these teams got kind of scared to death with what happened with the Lions and the Colts and some of the other teams that had players, getting busted for gambling. I think the league is really trying to send a message that, like, there's, draft gambling is real and it's pretty mainstream now. Like, don't you be like giving out all this information. So I think whether it's actually a memo from the league, which I don't think it was, I think just teams know this, right? Like, you don't need to be told this necessarily. So I think that all these organizations are really tight-lipped. I mean, I was told that this is how teams are thinking now within the league. So I think you're not getting a lot of those leaks that you normally would be getting from teams. You're getting them from agents. You're getting them from sources that maybe aren't as reliable. So I think that's, anything you hear, anything you've heard, anything you hear in the next couple of days is likely just things being thrown at the wall, or just not things that I would be, I would back 100% at any point. So, we'll see what happens. Again, maybe that was a 1-year thing. Maybe that, it all blows up and this year is back to normal. But I don't think that's the way it is. I think this is kind of how it is going forward. And so it's something to keep in mind.
Definitely something to keep in mind. If you're going on Reddit anytime in the near future, don't be trusting any random Reddit posts and blowing steam like Will Levis last year. But
So one more thing I wanted to say with that. Sorry, like these teams have the way that these players got busted, by the way, in the last year, where they have like these GPS trackers, the geo tracking. They know who's betting, who's going on their apps, and there could be like there's actually like some theory that there are some of their text messages in the locker room or in the facilities are being tracked. Like I think they're scared to death. So even just like texting or, anything like that, like there is, I think there's monitoring that these teams are, really scared to death of, like a big brother thing that's going on. So that all, plays into this as well.
Definitely a lot of moving parts, a lot of things, and makes a lot of sense now with the league being so in bed with gambling companies, all these things coming up, not just in the NFL, but across other sports as well, that GMs and so on and so forth, and teams are telling everybody, don't say a word and keep it close to the vest. But Tia, you tweeted out not too long ago some bets you made about the first pick certain teams are making. I'm sure a ton of those prices moved. Maybe some of them have, maybe some of them haven't. Talk to me about which of those bets you're, I want to say, I guess, most confident in, or just what is still actionable from there. And then we'll go around the horn and talk some other bets that are still actionable so our viewers and listeners can get something down if they like what you guys are saying.
Yeah, and these are offshore that I've got them. I'm sure you can find some in legal shops. I don't have them in my state, I don't believe, but and the limits are low. So these are just more. I like taking kind of the first pick for in terms of position group and matching them with a team, because there's like no research done. If you look at the opening lines or even some of the lines now, like it's pretty much all over the map, and there's no rhyme or reason. And so again, using some of my like the GM characteristics and GMs that focus only on premium positions in the first round and other GMs that don't care, and vice versa. You can really narrow down some of these that make sense. And I like taking some stabs. I have the Browns, for example, their first pick. Now they don't pick till 54. Wide receiver was plus 500 last week when I gave it out. It's 250 now. I'm sure you can find, Suma might have some other numbers that are a little bit better than the 250. I think that's still a good number. I think Troy Franklin's a guy that is, probably really, really high on their list, and he could be there at 54. So, he's definitely capable. And then, there's a bunch of other receivers that are bunched in that group that kind of fit what they like. A bunch of their, and I talked about this last time I was here, looking at, the teams that are loaded that have a good roster like the Browns, so playoff level teams with GMs that, jobs are pretty secure. Look at the 2025 cap situation and their position breakdown and who's on the roster, who's signed through through next year, because that can give you a little bit more of a hint as to a different route. They go best player available, or a position that maybe isn't a current need but could be next year. And so the Browns really only have Jerry Jeudy under contract next year. So I think even at 250 or a little bit, plus 300, I think are good numbers if you want to take a stab there. The Bengals, that number moved against me, but they have wide receiver at plus 750. And it's, if you think that T. Higgins could be gone next year, there's really not much behind Jamar Chase. That could be a situation where if a Brian Thomas is there and, or, if, Mitchell's there, there are guys that could be there for them at plus 750 that I think is interesting. I think Carolina offensive lineman at plus 185 is a good number. It was about the favorite for about a week, and then the Leggett news came out. I guess he was on a podcast yesterday and said that the Panthers told him they would take him if he's there, which I don't buy. I'm sure they tell that to a lot of guys. Well, Leggett got steamed, and I think wide receiver got steamed for them. So you could get, I think you can get good value with offensive linemen at plus 185. So those are just a couple offhand. I think the Niners are not married to any one position. And they, when you look at next year's position grouping, like they have no corners outside of, I think, Ward. There's really nobody else. So that's plus 375. I think that's a good one as well. So those are just a couple I think that make some sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I think Suma mentioned as well, but I know Eric Eager also mentioned on a previous show, is when you're looking at the first round, you also have to definitely consider the cap situation for teams, not just this upcoming season, but in a couple of years past, because teams like to draft players in the first round, even a year prior to the year they might actually need somebody. But Suma, talk to me. What other draft bets have you made that are still actionable that we could potentially, the viewers can get down, that you like right now?
One is JC Latham over 14.5. I feel like I'm the only person on the planet that likes this over, because there are several guys who I talked to who bet the under at some point over the last 5 weeks or so. When I go through different mock scenarios, I'm having a hard time getting Latham like before pick 15. Some mocks have him going to the Chargers after a trade down. I think I even saw 2 mocks with Latham going 5th overall. Even if the Chargers, so you need a trade partner for the Chargers, then they need to drop all the way down into that range 10, 11, 12, 13. And then they have to like JC Latham at the top of the board, because Ravens GM, he reiterated that they will go BPA, that they don't want to overdraft people. And JC Latham is like OT5 on the big board. And there were a few not so greatly positive comments about him earlier this offseason. And when we have guys like Joe Alt will be gone, but when we have guys like Fashanu, Fuaga, maybe Fautanu, I think that there's a decent chance Latham will rather slip towards the, 16 to 19 range than him going way earlier. The Raiders, they need a right tackle, yes, but Talis Fuaga also fits very well with them. Like they said they want to ground and pound. Same fits to the Chargers. And in my opinion, like Fuaga seems like the perfect Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, want the shit out of opposing teams kind of guy. Saints, they desperately need a starting left tackle, maybe a right tackle too, but rather I'm seeing a left tackle there. And then we have some surprise picks like Byron Murphy, who could shake up the top 10. So to cut a long story short, I lean towards Latham going after pick 14 at the current price. I think he's in the plus 130 range still.
Got just some actionable info from Suma right there. Hey, man, you talked a little bit, of course, about Dallas Turner. You made some other comments of some other things that you were interested in. Anything else you're looking at right now that's still actionable for the viewers?
Don't have the odds in front of me on some of these, but some long shot first position picks that I made. Bengals first pick to be corner at 10-1. I think there might be 7-1, 8-1 still out there. I think that's acceptable. Bengals first pick to be D-line or edge. I bet that at plus 350. I think that's probably good to like the plus 275-ish range. Rams first pick wide receiver. I bet that yesterday. I know if you're one of three people that listen to Kanish on Hit the Books the other day, I know him and Powers were talking about that Powers and I bet that together. We got 15-1 on Rams first pick wide receiver. I think there's a 10-1 that is still out there. I think that is bettable. Kind of going off the Peter Schrager comment that he said that if the Rams do stay in the first round, they're going to take offense. And I think that wide receiver could be an underrated potential need for the Rams because they do need a little bit more of a speed element to their receiver core. And Cooper Kupp is getting up there in age and obviously has an injury history as well. So maybe they get 1 year in front of a potential Cooper Kupp divorce in the next year or two and take receiver. So I think that was a good bet at that price. And I'm looking at some stuff, seeing if there's anything I think is still out there. Chop Robinson at now 26.5 is an important number on this because Tampa is picking 26. And I think that Tampa probably would end his slide if he does fall to 26. But there's been reports about Robinson where Jeremiah was saying that a lot of teams think that Robinson could potentially be the fourth guy in that 3 edge rusher tier. And there's been some other positive comments about him as well, but I would need 26.5. And I think you could maybe find it in the minus 180-ish range. I think that would be worth a play also. But again, the problem with draft is, I said it earlier, you just look at a player, you sneeze on a play, and it moves 100, 200, 300 cents right now. So not a ton that's still out there, but that is some stuff that I think is still probably playable if you could find a similar price to what I mentioned.
Gotcha. So I actually have a follow-up question for you, Hitman. So not anything specifically, but kind of just a general like betting potential, I want to say strategy, but way to look at things. So obviously, if there are some situations where teams in their first selection, they have pretty heavily juiced. For example, I see a Saints offensive lineman around minus 400. I know that you mentioned earlier that if you get good intel, you're willing to just lay the number because if the intel is right, it shouldn't really matter in a situation like this. Do you ever look into laying the juice on those markets that are just first draft pick position versus a player in a situation like that? Or is that something you don't really look to at all? Because then it gives you obviously more options because you have the whole group.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to lay something like that on a mid to late first round pick, like I would have to think it's a home run source or I have home run information, because it's one thing to lay like a minus 400 on the second pick where all right, it's going to be quarterback and it's going to be one of two players in all likelihood. But when you get into the range that you're laying like that type of price, like on a Saints, or I'll give you another example, like Steelers O-line, I think is minus 300 and they're picking 20th, I want to say. Like you get to the 20th pick, like stuff happens. Like a player, I know they're going to want to, in all likelihood, take an offensive lineman. But what happens if there's a free fall on a player at another position that they had a high grade on? What happens if there's a trade out and they trade out to 35th pick or something? Like there's a lot more volatility when you're laying big prices later in the draft. So I think that if you are going to look to lay big prices on stuff, the earlier in the draft, the top 5, top 10 is the better pick set to do it, rather than laying big prices on something like Steelers offensive line minus 300, pick 20. So if I was ever going to do that, I need home run intel.
Yeah, I mean, Hitman's exactly right. I think the one thing we do, and I think draft analysts do, they overrate their I guess their the fact that how confident they are in what happens after pick 7 or 8. Like it's just what happens in the 20s is just so all over the map. All it takes is one team to make a surprise pick, and that could be a domino effect that changes everything. That's why the whole Xavier Leggett saying, "Oh, the Panthers said they'll take me if I'm there at 33." Well, what if there's an offensive lineman that they never thought would be there? They need offensive line help. Like, are they going to pass on someone who should have gone 20 that dropped and because they told Leggett they go 33? Like, it makes no sense. Like, all these things every year we see it where guys slide. There's a trade up. What if teams do get desperate and there are multiple 20s, someone takes Nix or it wasn't supposed to go, and then one of the offensive linemen drops or anything like that. So yeah, that's why I like the position and the player market too, because I typically look for teams in the 20s or even don't have a first round pick, because that is like best player available. It's rarely is it like just the need that every mock draft is putting in there. It's guys that you wouldn't even suspect. It's Lamar Jackson was never supposed to go to Baltimore. Like that was never a connection anybody made. And they already had Joe Flacco. They were a playoff contender. And so like things like that, you never know. So that's where I like taking the longer shots. You mentioned the Steelers. I think the Steelers are like -2 something to take an offensive lineman in the first round. And yeah, that could happen. And it should be, I think it should be more coin flippy than -200. I would look at all the other markets. I have a bet on Pittsburgh, like it's like 12-1 or 14-1 on defensive linemen, because if you look at next year, Cam Hayward, he almost retired this year. He's a free agent next year. They have nothing else at defensive tackle, really. I think they have Benton, who they drafted in the mid rounds last year. That's it. So like why defensive tackles in general in the market are getting paid like crazy. The surplus value of getting a first round defensive tackle who's really good is very high now. So I think defensive tackles could get pushed up. So I took a shot there with the Steelers because it's just way too much uncertainty to not take stabs at kind of second tier position groups for some of these teams. So I totally agree.
Very well said, both of you guys. Thank you. Suma, any last thoughts on what Hitman and Tia were discussing, or just anything in general before we sign off? Still muted, Suma.
Classic, sorry. No, nothing really to add. Just hoping and praying for some more nuggets of information these upcoming days.
Definitely have some time to get some information going. But with that being said, we'll see what happens in terms of information throughout the rest of tonight and tomorrow, because we'll be live again at noon tomorrow discussing more NFL draft. New information hopefully comes in, and we'll have more actionable bets to give out for you guys. And again, don't forget that Thursday during the draft, Rob Pizzola will be live on the channel doing a watch along with the rest of the Forward Progress crew. On behalf of Suma, Hitman, TA, and myself, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the content. We will see you guys tomorrow, same time, same place, with more draft information. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.